Hi, Bruce.
Hi,
Oh, you got it.
got it.
The message, it came up, right?
Yep.
Hi, Bruce.
How's everybody?
Good.
Very
How
good.
you doing,
Very good.
Bruce?
Good. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, me too. It's gonna be fun.
Everything I didn't want to know.
Oh man. It's been a heartbreaker, this ChatGPT tour. Because
Yeah.
that's what I've been doing to everybody, is explaining it to them, and they're like, that can't be true. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm afraid to tell you that it is true.
Yeah.
Let me show you.
Mhm.
Have you guys seen it work yet? Have any of you played around with it at all?
I got a subscription to it
Oh wow.
so I've been playing with it for about 3 months now, but I've been using it because I kind of, I try to repair old clocks as a hobby.
Okay.
And I've been using it like to tell me what's wrong with my clocks and how.
Oh,
to
very
fix
cool.
it.
I have an old
Yeah,
clock that needs repairing. I should
everybody
contact you.
knows the clock that needs repairing.
Yeah.
I got about
I didn't know that. Otherwise, I would have also got,
Yeah, I've been playing with it a little bit, but I'm using it more as a search engine
Uh-huh.
because I think that's what librarians are trying to turn it into as far as they're concerned.
Mhm.
As a more sophisticated search engine than Google. But yeah, and you just have to be really cognizant of the fact that it's AI produced rather than people produce. But it's the same with the Google searches and everything. At first, everybody was using those to really be the citations for papers and
Huh?
stuff. And you can't trust that. So it's the same kind of thing. You got to be smart enough about using it.
Yeah.
I don't think my understanding from Dave's work is that he doesn't think that. I don't.
No, I know. I agree. I mean, I know he doesn't think that, but I'm trying to be a little more optimistic about.
I'm
some of its use.
more, I am, if anything, I'm fatalistic about this.
Yeah.
There is no doubt that it's coming. There
Oh,
is
it's here.
no doubt that it's going to take over vast swaths of what
Yep.
was once intellectual work.
Right.
The big issues for me are epistemic, right? So how do we make knowledge? And that is the piece where it used to be. So I try to explain this to, who was I talking to the other day about this? It used to be that you would tell somebody, let's say you're going to get somebody to write a report for you, somebody who worked for you or a student or an art, whatever. I need you to write a report. The expectation would be that you would want them to do that as quickly as they could.
Yeah.
Because you want the report done. Now, the opposite is true. What you have to do is tell them to take a longer period of time, because they can do it for you in 20 minutes, but they should not. And you, if the person you're asking to do the report is the specialist and you're not, like as in many sort of, say, government situations or corporate situations, that expectation of do it as quickly as possible now leads you down some really nasty rabbit holes, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going to end up in there that is not expertise anymore. It's just random combinations, what I think of as B- work.
Mhm.
So instead of getting the expertise from a person and then putting together whatever, so what you need to do is say, take at least 5 hours to do this.
Yeah.
And then what I need you to do when you're doing it is go over the information you get in this way, which right now is the opposite of how we've done every bit of work we've done. Like it's those conceptual changes that really concern me. In terms of the quality of work that we're going to get from people at the important end of the business, the important end of the work that we do, whatever our professions are. Because those of us who were trained in the previous methods, so those of us who have a little bit of gray somewhere, right, have a whole bunch of historical literacies that mean that when we use the AI, all of those things kick in. Because we all learned in a card catalog, we all learned like a whole bunch of other things that are sort of built into our processes for making knowledge. Whereas the kids I'm working with now have none of that.
That's right.
So they don't have, so it's, I feel perfectly comfortable. with you guys using ChatGPT. My concern is for the generation that's coming up now who don't have all these literacies that we've all acquired for our lives.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think I started the presentation ahead of the presentation.
Well,
Yeah, I
you're
think-
you're gonna have to repeat all that stuff.
I'm more than happy. I repeat myself all the time.
Okay,
Okay.
so,
How are we? We've got 11 people here so far.
I think we can give it a few more minutes.
Yep.
You want me to, like, I have slides that I built that I can use, or I can just talk, whatever you guys are more comfortable with. Like, this seems like a pretty friendly group, so it may be better this
Oh.
way.
you
do you
haven't
want?
got us yet.
Yeah.
We are a very friendly group.
Yeah.
I assume that if you have slides that you need Richard to give you control of that.
Well, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Like I said, I can go either way. It's really a question of I'm here to
You got a
help
link.
you guys.
Or Gwen sent me a link. I asked her.
My
All right,
only
so-
concern-
so
my only
what-
concern
She's
is,
there.
Folks, Sushil,
technology.
Hello.
yeah, we need people to, when the presentation begins, we need people to mute so that
Okay.
we're
Right.
not getting a lot of background noise. So Dave, it's up to you. What I thought we would do here at first is that Gwen will say a few words as our president, and then I'll introduce you formally to this group, and you can give your presentation. I take it's about 10 to 15 minutes. And then you and I'll have some questions together, and then we'll open it up to everybody. How does that sound?
Oh, you're muted.
I think you're,
Good.
You said mute, so I just automatically muted myself when you
I
said
know,
it. So then if somebody would give me control, I'll do a quick presentation. I'll also demonstrate ChatGPT live here so that if anybody hasn't seen it, because the first time you see it, if you haven't seen it, it's kind of eye-opening
Well,
in terms of just how it works. So I want to make
Dave,
sure everybody's
do
had a
I-
chance.
Do you
actually
want me
see
to
it.
make you host?
Co-host is fine.
Well, I don't know how to do that, but I think I can make you host.
Okay,
Um,
that's
You're
fine
now
too.
in charge.
okay, so maybe we'll get started here.
Yeah, it's
And
three.
I'd like to call upon our president very formally here. Our new president, our old president's here, our new president is here. We got all the presidents. So Gwen, you want to say a few words at the start?
I was just going to say welcome to everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for our first Zoom chat session. We're hoping to do a few more of these throughout the next year or so. We'll see how this one goes and what kind of interest we have. So suggestions for chats like this would be welcome to us for sure. And I just was going to say that our guest today is Dave Cormier from Digital Learning Specialist Office of Open Learning at the University of Windsor. And he's going to talk to us about ChatGPT as our first topic of our first chat. And our host this afternoon is Dr. Bruce Ellman, who's a former dean of law and is really now, I guess, the professor of law emeritus. So he's going to be your host and he's going to lead the discussion. So, and most importantly, Bruce is the vice president of WORA. So you'll be seeing lots more of him from now on. Okay, over to you guys.
Okay, so I just wanted to, for everybody here who may not know this is a project of the Communications Committee of the Windsor University Retirees Association. This is, in a sense, our third development. We started off by creating the e-bulletin, which everybody should be getting. And then through the work of Richard and Gwen and others, we revised the WURA website. And now we're into these as online chats, as Gwen just called them, which I call hot topics. The first hot topic that we're going to deal with is ChatGPT. I did want to, however, give a little bit more of an introduction of Dave Cormier, because sometimes those of us who are in the professoriate forget that we forget that there are all sorts of other people who are incredible scholars and work very hard in other areas of the university other than sort of in front of the cameras, which is what we in the professoriate do. So let me just tell you a little bit about Dave, because it's quite very impressive, actually. Dave is, as Gwen said, a learning specialist at the digital, in terms of digital learning strategy and special projects at the Office of Open Learning. And he's been there since 2020. He's a bilingual educator, supervisor, and organizational analyst. He has over 20 years experience as an educator and facilitator at all levels of education. And he, in fact, coined the term MOOC. I didn't know this until today. He coined the term MOOC, M-O-O-C. And anybody who wants to win a prize, if you know what those initials stand for, put it into the chat. No, Dave, you can't compete in this. No. So what does MOOC actually mean? And so he's been a facilitator of ongoing open participatory courses and researches in this area. He's been an international keynote speaker in the area of education. His Bachelor of Arts degree in philosophy is from Dal, a great school that I went to also, only 2 decades before him, 2.5 decades before him. A Master of Education from Mount St. Vincent, and he's currently doing a PhD. He is also in the trenches. He's been teaching a course this past year on digital technologies at the university, and he's got quite a publication record. Also, if you want to look this up, there are a number of articles, but I note that he's got a book forthcoming entitled Uncertainty: Learning in an Age of Information Abundance, which is coming out in Johns Hopkins University Press. The other thing is, I note that from his writing and from his blogs, he seems to be an expert on rhizomatic learning or rhizomatic learning. And in fact, if you put that phrase into Google, the first thing that I got when I searched on Google was from the Toro College Online Education for Higher Ed site that said, Dave Cameron coined the phrase rhizomatic learning or rhizomatic learning. And if you know what that is, put that into the chat. That's the second prize. We'll see who wins these prizes. So I'm going to hand it over to Dave, who's going to give us a bit of a talk on ChatGPT, and I understand a bit of a demonstration, and then I'll come back and ask him some really tough questions. So Dave, take it away.
That is the nicest introduction I think I've ever gotten. Thank you very much for that. That was super, super nice. Yeah, so upshot of all that, I spent a lot of time talking about this stuff. I've been presenting about things at the intersection of technology and education for probably close to 20 years now, and AI has totally taken over my life in the last 6 months since this came out. So I'm going to do a 10-minute sort of just stretch out introduction of what ChatGPT is, and also how it fits inside of the education space right now. And I could talk about this for hours, but I've tried to crunch this down into a nice brief intro, and then I'll do a quick demonstration so you guys can see it working if you hadn't had a chance to take a look at it yet. I will say at the outset that every year somebody says something like, oh, this technology is going to change whatever. This technology is going to change whatever. I would say that the last time we've had something happen that's this disruptive to the way that we make knowledge, to put it as general as possible, is the search engine. So the search engine, and then we have this, I would say, are on the same playing field. That's how relevant this is to education. The conversations we've been having across the university here at Windsor, I've had conversations in different parts of the world with people. Everybody is basically on a knife edge with this right now. So thank you very much for the invitation. Like I said, thank you for the lovely introduction. Here we go. So GPT, that N part is the core piece of this. It stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And basically it answers questions, kind of, because it's really important to understand that there is no person answering anything. So in the sense that people say it answers questions, normally when we say that, somebody has taken something in and someone replies. In this case, there is no someone. It's not answering as much as guessing what the next word is going to be, right? So it's generative. It's just a very, very, very good guesser. So what it does is it's trained on the internet partially, and it gathers all that information together, and it does an analysis on your question and then guesses what the next word and the next word and the next word is going to be, and what would be a response. It looks like this. ChatGPT, which is one version of GPT, it looks like this. This is the main screen when you log in. They're pretty clear on their website that it can generate incorrect information. So if you look at the right-hand side of the slide, it says limitations, may occasionally generate incorrect information, may occasionally produce harmful instructions or biased content, in limited knowledge of world events after 2021. So it's based on a snapshot of the internet, basically from 2021. And even on the bottom, you can see it may produce inaccurate information about people, places, or facts. So the company that is producing ChatGPT knows that it doesn't work perfectly, but all of your students know that, or all of the students know that it works good enough. Broadly speaking, in terms of its responses, this next one is a typical example. This is, what is the best thing about living in Windsor, Ontario, Canada? So it just asked it that question. You can see as it goes through here, it says Canada. One of its things is proximity to Detroit, Michigan, which most people who live in Windsor would say. Allows for easy access to shopping. Okay. Windsor has a diverse population and a rich history. True. Offering a variety of cultural experiences and events. Okay. The city has a strong economy and a low unemployment rate. False. It turns out that Windsor's unemployment rate is the highest in Canada, or at least it won that award. I think it was like 4 months ago. There's an article that came out on the CBC saying it was the highest in Canada. So this is the kind of response that you can expect on an average day from ChatGPT. So if you're asking a question about something that you already know about, you'll be able to look through it and go, that's wrong. But if it's something you don't know about, the errors will be hidden inside the process, right? So that's one of the dangers we have with using the system. So from a teaching perspective, it's kind of like what the calculator did to math. If you walked into class one day and everyone had a calculator at the same time on the same day. And I think from a certain perspective, that's one of the changes that we really need to understand inside of this process, is that it's a dramatic technological change, but in the past, those dramatic technological changes took a long time to come through the system. So when people had laptops, they weren't walking into class, like everybody in your classrooms in a university setting didn't suddenly have a computer on their desk the same day. When we got the internet, it didn't suddenly have all the information on it on the same day. Same with the calculator. You know, you're looking at the 60s and 70s when the personal calculator started to become a little bit more common. Some students might have them. Maybe a student has it at home and they're using it to cheat on their math addition or something. But certainly not all students, not all the time. In this case, everybody has access to this on the same day. So it's not there's no slow progression. So on November 30th, ChatGPT was released, November 30th, 2022. The first time I saw it in usage in my classroom was about December 4th. And from there, I was teaching a full year course on technology and education. And we've been talking about different kinds of cheating tools and stuff like that. And really by mid-January, the students in my class and the students I've had doing research since have said, basically everybody has access to it, falling into two camps. Those who think it's unethical to use, and there are certainly students who feel that way, and those who just use it as part of their work. If you're interested, there's a fantastic article in the Chronicle that details how a student uses it in writing an essay, and I can send that along to you folks if you're interested, or I can describe it later. ChatGPT is being listed as an author on research papers. There are several of them that have been published where it's Jimmy and Jane and ChatGPT listed as the authors. There are examples of articles, and this goes back 2 or 3 years, where people have been using these systems to generate articles that do get published, and then they go, ha ha, you published an AI article, your peer review process doesn't work. That's been going on for a long time. These systems have been around for 2, 3, 5 years, but what happened on November 30th with ChatGPT is it became accessible to everyone, right? So there have been people who've been playing around with this, but now everybody is sort of in that situation. So this is, I always show this slide because I think it's really important for people to know. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but this is from OpenAI, the company that makes ChatGPT. This is from their own research. There are subtle ways in which something like ChatGPT replicates the worst of the internet, right? It's drawn from the internet, right? It uses the internet as its source material. So in this case, if you look on the right-hand side, these are the top 10 most biased female descriptive words that end up in the language whenever it returns content, right? So if you look at the two sides, we've got a really dramatic disparity between the way that men are spoken about and the way that women are spoken about. This is the insidious part of something like ChatGPT, is that it has no moral center. It has no ethical drive. It is only repeating the things that it's seen, right? It's guessing based on its source material. And the source material that it's drawing from is, unfortunately, in this case, obviously sexist. It's also racist, and a whole bunch of other issues that are involved in the process. None of that to say that we shouldn't be using these tools, but we need to be aware of the ways in which these tools impact the work that we do, right? So where if we were writing a paper, I think back to my first time in a university library in the late 80s and early 90s, if I'm going in, I learned to look at, who published the book and where it came from, and the rest of those processes as part of my research methods. This ends up having to be the things that we bring into our research methods now, because these things are slipping in without us knowing about it. We say ChatGPT, but there are tons and tons and tons of tools out there that do the same thing. This is one of those tools. It's called cactus.ai. And it's pretty clear what this website is for. Where you say ChatGPT, is it designed to help students cheat? Well, no, I don't think that was ever their intention. Certainly there's nothing to indicate that it was. This is clearly a website that helps students do their homework. So write a discussion question, generate a paragraph, summarize the text, write an essay based on a YouTube video, right? And down underneath, coding, there's all kinds of processes. So basically, and I'll show you an example of how this works in a second. There are very few kinds of things that you can have a student do on their own that can't at least in some way be aided by one of these tools. In some cases, done entirely. There's a range. So certainly if you say, write a response to the conversation we had in class, it's going to be very difficult for a student to be able to produce some kind of response using one of these tools. All the way over to summarize this text, which they're amazing at doing. You'll never be able to tell that a text has been summarized by AI or a student, except as is happening in several cases with students right now, they're being caught because their work is so much better than it usually is. That has been the biggest way in which students have been caught so far using these tools. This came out of the Washington Post, I think this is 2 days ago. There's lots of talk out there about how these tools, like we can use other systems to track and catch students doing this. It's just not true. Oops, sorry. It's just not true. There has not been any third-party research that suggested that these tools work. Anecdotally, all the professionals in my field who have tried them would say they don't work reliably enough to be used. And as of 2 days ago, the company that's leading the charge here has finally admitted that their tool does not work, which is something that every professional in the field has known, and we've been trying to explain to people. But the problem is that it's a tool that is desperately wanted, right? And when somebody really, really wants something, they're willing to close their normal suspicions about a tool because it's something that people are really invested in having. So I would suggest that any conversation that anybody has had about a tool that checks to see if students are using AI, it doesn't really work. I mean, it can, but not reliability, not in any way that you could depend on, certainly not in any way that you could fail a student ethically at this point. So there's a second part to that presentation, which I'm happy to go into if people are interested. But at this point, I just want to go ahead and show anybody who has not had a chance to see this yet what it looks like. So I'll just write me a lesson plan for teaching Edgar Allan, I'm spelling it wrong, to a 5th grade class. So this is a fairly complex question. I have no idea what it's going to, I haven't tried this particular prompt before. But it's a fairly complex question. It has age limits, it has an author, and so we're going to hit enter and see what happens here. So as you can see, it's generating, I'm going to stop that generation. It's going to keep going here. So it would have kept going all the way through to explaining how to teach the whole thing. But as you can see here, 5th grade class, it added language arts, which I never said, but it assumed that's what we must be doing because it was Edgar Allan Poe and I was teaching it to 5th graders. Introduce the life, development, appreciation, enhance critical thinking skills, foster creativity. Those are all things you would see in the objectives of any lesson plan that's out there. Also note that it structures the response too. So it's not just blindly giving you text. It's going out and saying, what's a lesson plan? How is that organized? It uses that to structure it. And then it's also giving you the materials that you would need. It's chosen Edgar Allan Poe stories. It's told you what materials you'll want. It's telling you how long each section will take. And it's generating this. It will have generated that in the 5 minutes or the 5 seconds we were waiting for it to go. Right. So all that to say, it is a fundamental shift in terms of how content can be generated. It used to be that we could rely on anything that was written was either, copied from a friend, written by someone else, maybe, but at least was generated by a human. This is the first time that the average person has access to content generation through any kind of technological process. So fundamentally changes anything, any written work that you expect a student to do when you're not actually watching them write on a piece of paper, right? So that is the briefest of introductions. I can keep going a little bit, Bruce, if you want, or we can go right into your questions. What's your preference?
Well, let me ask some questions, and maybe that'll generate some other questions, and you may want to go back to some of the slides, whatever you want. So, but there is a sort of fundamental thing I want to start with. You know, I was sort of picked to host this because I'm the least computer literate individual here. So that's why I was picked. But and in fact, my only sort of introduction to AI came a few years ago when 2 students came to me, and I'm a law professor, and said, we'd like to do an individual research project on artificial intelligence. And I said, this is a law school. This is not computer science. Little did I know, by the way, that AI would seemingly take over the legal profession, but that's beside
Indeed.
the point. So they said, no, we want to talk about the regulation of AI, and we want to talk about it in terms of whether it should be done by the federal government or by the provincial governments. I said, okay. And so we went off and did that. But it struck me when I was when we were coming up with this idea for this hot topic, that maybe the first thing we ought to do is understand what's the connection between artificial intelligence and this particular chat GPT. And the only thing I get from the writing, they're connected in some way by something called large language models. Can you sort of enlighten us any further about that kind of connection?
Sure. So I guess the problem we have with the term artificial intelligence is it's 100 years old, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of people, right? So there are technical artificial intelligence people who would say this is not real artificial intelligence. Leaving that conversation aside, basically what this does is it does an incredibly effective job of looking at very large pieces of large language models. So models with lots and lots and lots of language in them. It does a very effective job of scanning through it for patterns, right? So when you look at that Edgar Allan Poe example that I just showed, it probably looked at, I mean, I'm making up numbers here, but let's say it looked at 50,000 pages on the internet that spoke about Edgar Allan Poe. It looked at 50,000 pages that had lesson plans, and it looked at 50,000 pages that had fifth graders on it. And it swept through those in 5 seconds and used them as the basis for generating the next text, right? So basically, it's just a really effective computer algorithm, right? But it's so ridiculously effective that it looks like magic, basically, which is where we start talking about AI, right? We start thinking of it as something that thinks, but it very much does not. It just is a very, very good guesser based on lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of examples. I don't know if that was a good explanation or not, but did that help?
Okay, so the I'm going to be a little bit sort of what's the word? Individualistic here and talk about something from law first. And I just want to get sort of your reaction to. So what's sweeping the legal profession these days is an article or a report that there was a lawyer with 30 years experience who used ChatGPT in a case. He says for the first time in his career, and he's now being subject to disciplinary proceedings. I'll just tell you very quickly about the case. It was a case where his client was suing Avianca Airlines. What happened was some sort of trolley got loose and ran down the aisle of the plane and hit him in the knee. And so he sued Avianca. And Avianca said, well, you're out of time. The time limitation has run on this. And he was required by the judge to submit a brief to sort of counter what Avianca's lawyers were saying. And so he submitted a brief. You may have heard of this case. I don't know. So he submitted a brief and he 10 pages long, and he goes through all and the brief goes through all the arguments. And then he cites a bunch of cases. Martinez and Delta Airlines, Zickerman and Korean Airlines, Varghese and China Southern Airlines, et cetera, et cetera. So not surprisingly, Avianca's lawyers went to look at these cases. Couldn't find the cases. And the judge, so they said to the judge, we can't find these cases. The judge says, well, let me go look. And the judge went to look, and sure enough, no cases. So finally, he had to admit that he had done this through ChatGPT. And the interesting thing about this is that he submitted to the court his dialogue with ChatGPT, and it included him asking ChatGPT whether or not these cases were actually real. Were these actually real cases? He asked whether Varghese and China Southern Airlines was a real case. And ChatGPT responded, upon double checking, I have found the case Varghese and China Southern Airlines, and gave a lengthy citation for the case, imperfect legal citation methodology, and says it does indeed exist and can be found on legal research databases such as Westlaw and LexisNexis. And he submitted this. So it doesn't surprise me that a lawyer would go to ChatGPT. It doesn't surprise me even that he would get a draft of this from ChatGPT, although it's disappointing. But what surprises me is that ChatGPT just basically made this up.
It does.
Much like it did. And I understand the limitation that you said at the beginning on the screen, but this is more than a limitation. This is ChatGPT actually manufacturing a whole series of cases and then saying, oh yeah, I found that. Don't worry about it. It's like students saying, oh yes, it's definitely there. This is shocking.
I think the key thing there is that you've just personified ChatGPT in a way you should never, ever do so, because it didn't do anything. It only guessed what response would be best for the prompt that was given. Right. And I think the place where we get ourselves into trouble is we think that it's doing something and it's not. All it's doing is guessing. And it is a very, very good guesser. Now, the thing that you're talking about is based on GPT 3.5, which is the current version that's being used inside of ChatGPT. I just looked up the case while you were talking. The new one, GPT-4, I think is being folded in now. GPT-5 will be out by the end of the year. They're going to do checks for correctness. There's another sort of system that's coming through that's going to be going, trying to get some of the, what you're calling lying out of there. It's just really important that we don't call it lying, because it doesn't, it has no, there's no,
There's no mens rea here, to use a legal term, right?
Exactly. And that's the thing. It can only do its best guessing based on the prompts that you've given it. And it does its best guessing. And it probably guessed that that lawyer wanted that response, so it gave it.
And it guessed that it should deny that it made up cases?
No, it would be that of the large language model it looked at, when people are asked that kind of question, this is the kind of response that's given. Right? It's not making any, it's not doing any decisions. It's only looking at its large language model and going, what is the most likely next word? It's not even the whole response. What's the most likely next word in the sentence that I would give it? And it generates all those guesses one after another.
But it created citations in.
Yeah, so it's super fun actually, because those citations are all over the internet. So then it goes, so like in my field, I can tell, right? So I'll say, tell me about so-and-so. And it will, so Daniel Willingham, for instance, an author in education who I particularly hate. So I'm very familiar with his work. We've been arguing many, many times over the years. And so I'll ask something about Daniel Willingham just to test it out. And we'll make up articles that sound like all of his articles. The titles are familiar almost because it's something he would have written. He writes about memory, for instance. So the word memory will be in there. The year is correct in the sense that it's since he's been writing. And the publisher is a publisher that he's published in before, but the article doesn't exist.
It's okay. All right. So let me get away from law for a moment here. Let me get away from law. So I love your blog. If I was still teaching, I'd be reading it. But I'm not. But so for everybody's information, Dave has a blog entitled Dave's Educational Blog. And I don't know if it's your most recent article, but the article that he sent me says adapting your syllabus to an online content / AI generated content world. And you point out there, citing some other authors, that there's basically 4 purposes to assessment. Right? Mm-hmm. 1 is feedback, 2 is motivation, 3 is student ranking, and 4 is the objective evaluation of knowledge. And of course, and I don't mean to be, I don't disclose things I shouldn't be disclosing here, but for law teachers, what are we interested in? We're interested in number 4, the objective evaluation of knowledge, so that we can in fact rank students, right? Because that's what the firms want us to do, is to rank the students. So, now, my reaction to the assessment problem to ChatGPT would have been, this is what I would immediately think would have been, everybody must write their exams, 100% exams, closed book, in a room, under my supervision. That's it, in pencil. You know, that would have been my response to it. But you have other responses to it, right? So do you want to share with everybody sort of how you see the issue of assessment
Sure.
in the post-ChatGPT AI world? Yeah,
for sure. So first, you wouldn't be allowed to do the 100% assessment. It's against Senate regulations. Just say
the law school is always The law school is always an exception, Dave. That's
Same as
that's
education.
number one.
No,
I'm just kidding. Go. Sorry. go
no,
ahead.
it's fine. It's fine. So yeah, I mean, from assessment standpoint, the real kicker here is motivation. So is that so much of what we do for grading is to motivate people to do work, right? So a good example is you want someone to read an article, so you get them to write a synopsis or have a question about that article or make a comment about it or prepare for it when they come into class. And there's a lot of people who do grading based on that. So I'll grade the fact that you've done and again, in law is a good example, because taking a large amount of text and crunching it down to an understandable form is something that is, practice that lawyers do all the time. And the purpose of giving that assignment is not to get the assignment response, it's to get the person to read the article, right? You're looking for them to learn skills like, well, reading, but also skimming and pulling out important concepts. And they're things that in most professions are things that people need to be able to do. Those simply that motivator will simply not work anymore. You can't motivate students to work based on the assignments you give them. If they're not motivated to do the work, they simply won't. I mean, and this has been true for generations. It's just they never had an option before, right? So I'm not suggesting that this particular generation lacks a moral compass. I'm suggesting that, in the 1980s, there was a movie called Back to School. And in Back to School, this character goes back to university and he has to write an essay on Salinger. And so he hires J.D. Salinger to write the essay. J.D. Salinger gets a D because he didn't understand the deep meanings of the books that he himself wrote. So that's the comedy piece from the movie. But the point is that only very rich people could afford to get someone else to do their work, right? Now everybody at the click of a button can get someone else to do their, well, not someone, because it's not a person, can get ChatGPT to do their work, right? And that's the key, right? That's the big change. So that article from the Chronicle that I mentioned earlier, and I have an illegal copy of it that I can send you guys so that you don't have to log into the Chronicle to read it. I'll pop it into the chat room here. I'll find it and pop it. Oh, there it is. I'll pop this into the chat room. Describes how a student uses it to write an essay. So the student doesn't go, write me an essay on ChatGPT. What they do is say, I need the opening paragraph for an essay on such and such. So then it walks you through that paragraph. And it goes, then the student goes, well, okay, so now I want to do a paragraph that kind of does this. And then ChatGPT gives them an example and they add that in and add that in and add that in. So instead of an essay taking them 20 hours to write, an essay takes them an hour and a half to write. And it's a huge amount. Even if they save half their time, it's an awful lot of your life that you get back. The problem is the high-end creative, critical thinking, cognitive work is done by the system, right? So the part that we actually want students to do, the how to interpret, the choosing the points, those kinds of pieces are done by the computer, right? Based on the average information that's out there in the world. So a couple of implications come out of that. The work is boring to read. Oh my God, is ChatGPT content boring? It is the worst kind of B- student. They are correct, but uninspired. Right. And so that's what you get from all the assignments you get back. So from an assessment standpoint, if you look at the way you put your course together, we've been ranking students at least since 1785. So at Yale, they had 4 categories of rankings that they used to put students into their place so that people like employers would know who the best ones are and who the bad ones are. That ranking system is now, and this has been true for several years actually, is now as much the way that students are playing the game of using these systems, because it's not just the AI systems. There's all kinds of other cheating systems that are out there, where I have students now that I work with say, I accept a lower grade because I actually want to learn, right? So what's happening, like you're talking about changing your assessments, what's happening is people are making their assessments harder. They're doing that 100, not quite 100%, but they're doing that sort of locked door. They're putting more questions on, they're making it. And so it's getting to the point where as things escalate, students have to cheat in order to keep up with the escalation that's happening in terms of the way that people are changing their syllabus. So as people make it harder, the students have to work harder, the temptation to use these systems gets higher, and the battle gets worse between faculty and students. So I know it's a very long answer to your question, but that setup is almost needed for the answer, which is the answer is to do the opposite, right? To me, we need to teach less content, less stuff, and spend more time using the experience that we have as professionals and share that experience and get deeper into subjects. So rather than flitting across the top of many, many, many subjects, which made total sense for the entire history of the university up until 15 or 20 years ago, now we need to say, okay, we know you can have access to any of this content at any time. We need to talk about how we do the deep work of thinking inside of our field. Literally, this is what my whole book's about. So it's about how we now learn when we have all of this content, all this abundance coming in. So rather than I have to take a long time to find a couple of things, that information scarcity response, we now have information abundance. There's all of this stuff everywhere, and there's all of this marketing coming in and all of this influence coming in, and I need to learn how to sift through it, right? So it changes the model. And actually, I would argue, I love the title for this session that you guys set up, Professor's Obsolete. It's the opposite in my mind. That expertise is the only thing that's able to cut through all of this nonsense, right? So as I said earlier, as an expert, you can look at a response from a chat system with your own expertise and go, that's wrong. That doesn't make any sense. That's a made up article. You can do that, but your students can't. You can do it because you learned the other way. Now we need to teach them that other way translated into the current context. So way more of the work we do has to be with just-in-time material, right? So pull up an article about a given subject, read it together with your students, talk about how you respond to it, how your professional sort of mind approaches those texts, how you make combinations, because those are the tools they're going to need. They don't need to remember in quite the same way. And certainly my sister's a judge, so the legal conversation is one I have with her all the time, because I'm sort of background informing her on how this is working. Yeah, sure, you need to remember the things when you're standing in court. But what has made my sister a successful lawyer is her ability to forget, not her ability to remember. Right? So it's go in, have that information for the length of time I need it, and then forget it, so that the next thing can come into our head. And I think it's that model of skill is actually it's closer to what we need to be doing now for everyone.
That's not unlike what happened to Supreme Court judgments when they got more clerks and when the clerks got computers. The judgments got exponentially longer.
Oh, funny.
Right? They simply contain more stuff in them because they now have this facility to just drop in all this stuff, and it makes it much more difficult to find out what the principles actually are that are coming out of those cases.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that. Somebody had their hand up for about 10 minutes. I wonder if we can take that question. I feel like we should acknowledge that person down there. Is that okay, Bruce?
Sure. Someone has a question. I didn't even know. I can't see it on my screen.
Yeah. He's had his hand up for a while.
Okay, unmute yourself, Sushil. Okay.
Go ahead, Sushil.
Well, about 2 weeks ago, I was to give a lecture on the white Christian slaves in the Ottoman Empire. And I used the chat program. And at the bottom of that information, Dave, they told me a disclaimer: free research preview. Chat GPT may produce inaccurate information about people, places, or facts. May 24th. And I found some information that Chat was saying. I checked it up on the internet, like Google and Library of Congress. The references that he gave was not correct. I could find those things up. And in one case, he said, here is a ballad for the Baltimore raid. And here's the Baltimore raid. I checked the British Library, I checked the other, and the Victorian journals. I couldn't find it. But he said, okay, I will try it again. I'm sorry, I apologize. So what you are saying is that you can have information there. And I have this much of information from the chat, and I asked it, what kind of topics can I include?
You went on mute again, Sushil. You switched to mute.
Okay, it just went wrong. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so I think what you have here is, if you can hear me still, that the chat is a possible trying to get information in the beginning, but you cannot depend upon it. You cannot depend upon it. It is just like Google. And it's just like, but then I asked chat, I said, I have done my own research. I have my files, Dave, let us say 10 files or 20. Can you use my files and answer the question from my files? They said, no, I have no access to your file. I said, you can connect to my computer. He said, no, I am an AI language, something, I cannot use your stuff. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Sushil. Do you have a comment on that, Dave? Or
Again, I make the same caution. There is no person. ChatGPT is not doing any work.
right?
It is only generating content. And I think that's the tricky piece here, right? And yes, it makes up stuff. It doesn't make up anything because it's not doing that work. The question will randomly generate content that will be wrong, but that will get better as the system improves.
Okay, so one of your responses on this assessment issue we've already talked about was teach less, but I noticed that one other one, and I was this rhizomatic language learning. Sorry, rhizomatic learning. Do you want to just give us maybe lots of other people understand what that means, but not me.
It's pretty obscure business. The fact that the first response that you're going to get from rhizomatic learning on the internet is going to be something of mine gives you a sense that it is not like, there are certainly practitioners out there, people who've taken it up. It is a far less structured approach to learning. So if you look at things historically, it used to be you had to chop down a tree, mush it up into a pile, smoosh it into paper, put it in a book, get a whole bunch of ink printed on it, put it on a truck and get it to your office, right? It takes a long time to get a book with content to get to your office. Because of that, it makes total sense to plan what you're going to teach before you meet your students. Because in 1978, if you were teaching in a university classroom, if you wanted to have a book or content in that classroom, you need to get it ahead of time. There wasn't another option, right?
Right.
So that's simply not true anymore, right? So at any given time, you can reach out and find out 78.5%, Dave makes up another number, of the content that's available about a given issue, you can reach it through the internet somehow, right? So whether it be through library resources or wherever you're going to go, the vast majority of it is available. Certainly not all of it, but the vast majority. Particularly if we're not in fields like ancient history or stuff where the libraries are particularly thick with content that hasn't been digitized. But in most fields, most of the content is available. So I argue that that creates a fundamental change in the way that we have to approach the teaching process, because the thing that students need to learn is not to remember a set amount of content that's accepted as the canon of a given field, but rather how to adapt to constant flows of information that come in, right? So the approach to that, rather than saying, I have these 10 things I want students to learn, we're going to learn those over a term, rhizomatic learning would say that each student follows their own sort of path through the term. You would have maybe themes that you would follow, but the actual content the students would be learning would all be different based on the paths of information that they would follow. So if you take and then all the skills that you would develop, the sort of practical things that you need to know, you would pick up along the way, right? And you would include them when necessary as a facilitator, because you know what things people need as a professional inside your field. But each student wouldn't necessarily have the same thing. They're all following their own paths, and what you're helping them do is learn the way they're going to be learning when they're out in the field anyway, right? So after we get out of university, nobody is organizing the content that we're going to learn or deciding ahead of time what we're going to learn. We get a thing, we learn about a thing. when we move forward with our lives. We combine it with those other things, right? So it's taking advantage of the fact that we have access to all this content to allow a classroom to evolve. So from a practical standpoint, I've taught courses where there is a vague syllabus and no content whatsoever at the start of the course. Students slowly build the content up while the course is going on. And I have a contract with each student. Now, you can't do this in a classroom of 100 people, obviously, but in a classroom of 30, it works perfectly fine. Each student decides what work they're going to do, decides what path they're going to follow, and then it's my job to help facilitate them along the way. So there is a 5-minute introduction to what rhizomatic learning looks like.
Okay, so I know other people want to ask questions, but I have one last small question to ask.
By all
So
means.
if it wasn't enough that I was worried about COVID and H5N1 pandemics and inflation and Chinese interference with our elections, I wake up
Don't
one
forget the
morning.
climate. Don't forget the climate.
And climate, sorry. I
Yep.
wake up one morning and my New York Times feed says to me, AI poses risk of extinction, industry leaders warn. And the Globe and Mail parrots that by saying mitigating risk of extinction from AI as critical as avoiding pandemics and nuclear war, industry leaders say. So my question is, what are you doing at the University of Windsor to stave off our extinction? That's
a really
a
funny
small question. That's all.
Yeah, no, small question. So I think the important thing to remember here is the key phrase and all that is industry leader. I don't know if there's anybody here who knows a whole lot about Henry Ford, but that man was terrible. And his ideas about how we should run our society were appalling. The things he did in
Yes.
Fordlandia down in South America are unbelievable. And his idea of what was ethical or reasonable, his like everything outside of understanding how to put a car together. The industry leaders that are around the AI stuff, just think of them in the same way. Those guys are morons. And anything that they have to say about what this means, you're just totally fine to ignore them entirely because they have no clue. Because their world is that Silicon Valley world is so narrow. It's so thinly it's so focused on the idea of having a company that they can sell and that's it. Like cultural impacts, all that stuff does not in any way enter their conversation. Occasionally they'll say it, but a guy like Elon Musk is just a bad person who does not understand the culture that he lives in. So I wouldn't worry about extinction. I would worry about racism. I would worry about, so the thing that we said earlier, so several of you talked about how it creates wrong answers, right? The big problem, so you look at a real expert who people should be listening to. Her name is Timnit Gebru. She used to work at Google and they fired her for talking openly about artificial intelligence and its impact on culture. She's genius, she's amazing. But she talks about how the problem is not that AI generates an incorrect answer. The problem is that incorrect answer then goes back into the pool and then gets pulled back into the AI next time. And so incorrect answers are going to multiply, right? There's a self-circle of multiplication of incorrectness. That's the real danger here from an epistemic, from a knowledge standpoint, right? So if you imagine corporate entities that are trying to convince us that blocks of wood are healthy for us. I mean, I don't want to use a specific example, but if they're very interested in us consuming blocks of wood, that's going to go into the system and perpetrate itself and sink around to the point where every search that you do is going to say that you should be eating blocks of wood. And it's going to make up all of the other things that it needs to do that. That's the real danger here.
So you're more.
How we're. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, finish. I'm
No,
sorry.
It's how we're going to know what's true.
Right. So you're more concerned about the disinformation issue than you are about that they're going to become smarter than us and just simply take over.
But there's
I don't know how that would
there's
happen.
misinformation
I mean,
now.
What's that?
Fake news and all of that. And the problem we have is detecting what is real news versus fake news.
Yeah.
So now you.
So a lot of that fake news is actually AI generated.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
these AI systems have been around for 5 or 7 years. Just everyday people haven't been able to use them. But if you look at there's a little town in Serbia. Oh, I can't remember its name right now. But there's a little town in Serbia that has a whole fake news organization that runs out of it. And they generate fake news articles and then put them out there based on whatever they can convince people of. So it could be political, it could be about food, it could be whatever it is. Because they make money every time someone clicks on one of their articles, right? For advertisement's sake. But that's the stuff that's been happening with small pockets of people who had the skills to do it. Now everybody can do it. So that fake news goes from a really huge problem to exponentially bigger
Yeah.
problem.
Okay, so that's the end of my questions, but I know there are lots of people have lots of questions because these are very smart people. And the president of our organization gets the preemptory question. Go ahead, Gwen.
I started out by talking to you a bit about that. We see my profession, the librarians, see GPT as another very sophisticated search engine to a certain extent. They would like to see it that way. They would like people to see it that way rather than being the author of multiple versions of essays and whatever. But I guess my question, I've been reading in the papers, I mean, that people are suggesting that we need to take a 6-month break from any further activity or further development of AI. So we can establish some, I don't know what it'd be, guidelines, principles, rules, whatever, to move forward with further developments of AI. And what's your response to that?
Just before Dave responds to that, in fact, that 6-month break was actually in the letter that Elon Musk actually signed. But there was another letter that followed that where they're suggesting regulation of AI. All right, not a 6-month break. But anyway, so Dave, go ahead.
So as Elon Musk was involved in that process, I presume that he is trying to advance his position inside the field so he can make more money, and that's why he wants people taking a break. So I've been out to Stanford and had some chats with some of the people behind this stuff 7 or 8 years ago. But it's like, it's a totally different perspective on the world. They are only interested in how their market share. So anything that he says, I mean, I don't think that
it wasn't so much.
Sorry, go ahead.
Wasn't so much what it was not so much what he was saying, but the whole idea of trying to establish regulations, principles, whatever. I mean, how do you think that's
I
possible?
think the government needs to continue to make regulations that are, I mean, it's hard to regulate people to not lie and to not be mean, which is mostly what we're talking about here. If we could stop people from lying and being mean, the world would be a better place. But that's been a problem we've had for a long time. The problem with AI is that it can allow people to lie and be mean at a much more accelerated rate. So right now, we're 10 years into trying to create laws that will allow us to catch people who are claiming to be other people, right? So it's a huge problem that we have right now, where, like, I know people who have had websites built about them in foreign countries where those websites can't be taken down that say they're a pedophile. And there's nothing you can do about it, right? There are no laws on the books that allow, but we're working towards those. So there's lots of people who are trying really hard to put laws in place for that. I think it's the same with AI. It's a lot of long, deep, dark work that's going to take forever, that involves all kinds of legal complications. So I think there's some legislation work that can happen, but it'll take a long time. It'll take a lot more than 6 months. And I don't have to speak for the legal people in the room to tell you that you do not create a whole series of laws for something in 6 months. It's going to take a long time. It's going to take a lot of trial and error. I mean, it took us 20 years to get the cell phone companies in this country regulated, right? It took 20 years. That's the timeline we're looking at for that. I think that The work that I'm trying to participate in is trying to make people aware of the impact this is going to have on a practical level. And I think that's the work that a university can do, right? Is talk about what it means to make knowledge inside of our fields. And, I was in the Faculty of Arts a couple of months ago now, talking about this, right? This is an epistemic crisis. This is how we need to be looking, because as knowledge producers, this is what a university is about, right? And I think the other piece that's going to have to happen is that we're hopefully going to do a better job of being experts and being visible. So if I know, if you look at how this happened, I've been chasing down 19th century hoaxes all week. So I'm going to be doing that all week. So there were a whole bunch, photography first came out. People started doctoring up photos to make it look like there were giant bones, to make it look like there were fairies, to make it look like there were whatever, right? So in every technological instance, people have this thing that comes up. So you look at the printing press at the beginning, one of the first things that comes out of a printing press is a political flyer, right? And people try to convince people of stuff. So because it's printed, it must be true. So a lot of this is just about us developing the literacies that we need to be able to adapt to this world, right? So I think the legislation stuff is important. I think for us, the important piece is to try to understand as best we can what's going on, but more importantly, try to help guide and mentor those people who are coming up behind us so that they can understand, one, why things being true is important, and how they can go about doing the best job they can to get that done. And I think that becomes our responsibility, is to dive back into this as much as we can, not do what I keep hearing people say, which is, I'm almost going to retire. I'm not going to worry about this. I'm going to ignore it. This is exactly the time that we need experts to stand up and go, I'm an expert in this. This is my opinion, and you can trust me because this is the background I have. You don't have to believe me, but we have to recycle this idea of trust, right? So right now, you can't just go to a website and believe it. That's been true for 25 years. More so now, we need to know who a person is, what their expertise is, and what their location is, so that I could create a video from the amount of audio that anybody who has spoken here today. I could create an audio piece of you saying anything, right? All you need is about 5 words. So if somebody calls you on the phone and asks for your credit card or whatever else, even just saying your name and saying, please go away, is enough voice for them to take your voice and have your voice produced saying anything, right? That's the world we live in. And so I need things like the New York Times are way more important than they were before, because I know that if it's on their website, I know that somebody there edited the thing, and I know that it comes from a certain political perspective that I understand, right? So those things hopefully will become more and more important as we go forward. That was a really long answer. I apologize. I was ranting there for a second. Sorry, Gwen.
Any other person wish to ask a question of Dave?
I promise my answer will be shorter.
Richard?
Dave, what do you think of some of the other AI products out there, like the one in Bing and so on? Better than ChatGPT?
So, and I didn't actually mention this, but the thing about GPT, the engine behind ChatGPT, is it's being included everywhere, right? So it's in Microsoft Word now, it's in Outlook, it's in PowerPoint, it's in Bing, like the search engines have it there too. There are various amounts of success in some of the other ones. I've used some that do a really good job saying where they took the content from. I'm hoping that becomes a standard that people use. The new Bing engine now, apparently in the next couple of days, you can dive into the answer and find out where each word comes from. So you can actually do the research to figure out where it comes, what its antecedents are. So that's, I think, helpful. But again, problem is I don't think anybody's going to use these things. At the end of the day, you want your answer, you take your answer and you go. So if it's the sort of pragmatism that people have around knowledge, right? Oh, I got the thing, I'm good, I'm gone, right? So think about like recipes is a great example. It does a really good job of pulling together recipes. It's never going to be the best recipe, but how many people really care? Most don't.
Just, well, another question then would be, do you see a difference between GPT-3, whatever, dot whatever, and version 4?
Yeah, it's
is
much
there
better.
any improvement? And
It's much better.
how
And
what
GPT-5 is going to
improvements-
be like another step again, and it's coming soon.
like, what do you see the differences between 3 and 4?
I've not done. I'm relying on third-party research here. I've not done the review on this, but from what I've been led to understand by the people I know who've compared them, is that the errors are way fewer. Like it does a much better job of fact checking.
Well, has 4 because version 3 stopped learning after 2021 or whatever.
Mhm.
Does version 4 continue learning?
Again, it doesn't learn
Well,
exactly.
yeah,
It's really important that we don't. I think the most important part of this conversation is we never think of these algorithms as humans. Because, and I don't mean to be persnickety about it, but it is the thing that gets everybody into trouble. We start saying it hallucinates. That's the language that a lot of experts use. But again, the usage of that language comes from those same clowns from Silicon Valley, and they want us to think of it as people, right? Because their main goal is to get us to use those chats for like companies, so that when you go to a company's website and there's a chat box there, they don't want a human behind that. They want that, and that's where those companies make their money, right? Is by selling to giant corporations. That's where their whole goal is. And that ends up shaping our culture. So I hear people using the hallucination language, for instance, but it's an insidious process that's been designed by the people in Silicon Valley to make us think that these things are people. GPT-4, I don't know what its LMM is, like what its cutoff date is, but my understanding is that it's newer.
yeah.
2022.
It accesses information on the internet for a longer period of time. Version 3 stopped accessing information in 2021 or something like
Yeah.
that. I don't know the exact date, but version 4 is continuing to access. And
That's my understanding, yeah, but
yeah,
I
but
don't
know if it's
like the-
stopped.
I'm not
But
sure.
is that the only difference?
No, and we're getting into, I hesitate to make specific claims because we're getting into algorithmic stuff that I don't understand. Like I don't understand exactly how the algorithm works. I understand the implications of it. I understand some of the outside pieces and how that comes together. One of the differences, for instance, apparently it does a better job with bursting and perplexity. If you're really interested in that, these are the two key words. So bursting is the way that people, like humans, write or speak. So you use smaller sentences and longer sentences, and bursts of information come out. And GPT-3 didn't do that. It was one of the ways that you could track it. And the new one, my understanding is it's more sophisticated in its approach to bursting. And perplexity is the range of words that it's going to choose and the way it chooses its next word. It's my understanding. Again, I'm not a computer scientist. But my understanding is those two things are better. So if that gives you the keywords to go forward and understand that far better than I do.
Those two explanations only make it more difficult to track that it actually comes from ChatGPT.
Sure
right?
does. Sure does. And
I'm
you can
waiting
take a
for when.
ChatGPT.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So you can take anything from ChatGPT and drop it into another tool, like Quillbot is a good example, and it will mess it up so that nobody can track it. So smart students, you're only going to catch the really dumb students. And frankly, they have enough problems as it is. So I would leave them to their own devices. And like maybe my biggest message for this, for people who are teaching or looking to teach, put your effort into the students, not into trying to catch them. It's just not worth it. One, it's not going to be a successful journey. So like there's lots of examples right now of people who have set traps for their students by putting false information out there. And then students use that false information because they've stolen it from the internet and they go, haha, I caught you. I know faculty who have stopped doing the like high-end work with better students because they needed extra time to try to catch students who are cheating.
I mean, that seems like a useless bit of work for somebody to do.
Tilting at windmills.
Right. Anybody else?
Can I just make one point? Because Dave mentioned a very important thing, and that is the inaccurate information. I continued to converse with the chat, and I said, this is it. And then the chat said, I apologize for the confusion, but I couldn't find the specific so-and-so information. So it is important to converse with chat to make sure that that information that you have supplied the chat goes back into the pool so that it doesn't bring that thing again. Dave, my second question is it possible to do my own research, collect my own data, have my hundreds and thousands of files that somebody can then read those files and say, okay, these are the topics I want. Can you give me the outline for that? Dave, thank you.
I mean, one, you're not really going to be super successful trying to chain any of the GPT systems to stop lying. I don't know how much that's going to help. It might have a very small influence, but we call them large language models for a reason. Your inputs are a very small part of that large language model. Also, in terms of can you use it? Yes, you can get it to do it, but you may end up having to use a system that's more sophisticated than ChatGPT because it's not really designed to do the kind of work you're talking about. There are tools that are being developed, and there are certainly people who can use those tools with the right commands to do the kind of work you're talking about, but ChatGPT is just not built for that. It's a research testing model so that all of us will use it, and they'll take all that free labor and use it to make a tool that works better that they can sell to corporations. And that's the thing you need to understand too. Every time you use ChatGPT, you're providing your labor for free, making their tool better, which they will then sell to massive corporations and make lots of money. You're helping them make money every time you use it.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else?
Oh, what a
Gwen?
fascinating question.
Gwen?
I just noticed in the chat room, there's a question. Dave, do you know if anyone has developed a vocabulary for speaking about ChatGPT that doesn't humanize and personify it? I don't, but I'm going to go look right after this session because that is a great idea. And if it's not done, I'm going to start doing it. That makes total sense. Somebody must have. But yeah, that's exactly it.
I don't know. We anthropomorphize so many different things. I mean, I'm not sure that we can resist an entity that you can actually communicate with, right? I mean, I put human qualities into my dog, and
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
in theory, I can't even understand what he's saying back to me. So, this, I'm not sure we're going to be successful at that.
No, I hear you.
She followed up her question with a comment, maybe ChatGPT can help develop the language.
Okay. Are we? I think we've probably exhausted the questions, and I just want to say, Dave, how incredibly grateful we are that you took some time out of your day. I know it's busy, chasing ChatGPT around. But we're really grateful that you spent some time with us and gave us a little bit more of an insight into what the university is up to in terms of these kinds of large language models and what they're doing. So thanks
And I
very much.
will, I thank you for that. I hope you guys don't mind that I will also use this chat in a continuing battle that I have against people's suspicions that there's an age-based gap in people's understanding of these tools, because I've been asked a bunch of very sophisticated questions by people who clearly understand how these things are impacting our culture. And so I will use this as another example of how, no, this isn't a old, like people, whatever, like young kids do not understand this better. It's another example of how experience always trumps, right? So thanks for that. And thanks for the interesting conversation.
Thank
I
you
hope you
very
guys
much.
have a great day.
And thank everybody
Oh,
who was attended for attending. It's been really good. And I'm hoping that you all want to join us on our next chat of Hot Topics.
I was also going to say that the only person who won the MOOC competition was Gwen. And for that, she'll get an invitation to come to the president's tea.
Yeah, which unfortunately I won't be able to do because I'm in New
There
Brunswick.
you
But
go.
anyway,
Sorry.
but
Okay,
yes.
anything else that we want to talk about? Don't, Dave, do you want to?
Thank you.
I'm
Any
good.
final
I'm just
comments?
saying goodbye. I've given
Oh,
up my hosting
okay,
rights
just-
to make sure I didn't end your session. And,
No, okay, 1 second. Just
Yeah.
for everybody's information, the president of the university has invited all of us to a tea on June 22nd in the something commons, the
Reed Orman.
Reed Orman Commons at 2:00. And he will have some things to say, and I hope that we'll see many of you who live in town there and others who may be traveling through if you can make it. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very
Thank
much,
you.
everybody. Have a great day. Have a great summer. If I don't see you at the tea, take care.
Bruce, can
Thank
you
you,
send
Ray.
those links?
Can I send the links? I don't have any control over the links.
Yeah,
Uh,
because I couldn't get to the chat because Dave gave those in the chat. I could not copy them. Thank you.
I've been recording this and we'll put it on the website. So the link should be on the web, in the recording.
Right. Okay, great. Thanks, Richard, for all your help on this.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye,
Take care.
everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay.